3A. Paisley. Returning to the schoolhouse was incredibly depressing. All the stares and averted glances, all the hushed tones and reserved body language. The I'm sorries that were always present to remind me of whom I had lost. My only freedom from sympathy was Fenton, who could truly feel our pain, but never wavered in his wistful personality. To say that Fenton was my best friend is only fairly accurate. He is my only friend, and it is hard for me to engage with others and make friends on a level deeper than the surface. At school, I jumped from person to person, engaging with everyone, but never truly being friends. Now, to be surrounded by so many consoling faces who do not know my pain and my life is exacting. I have only myself to blame, I know this. It isn't their fault that I never let them in. Fenton's wildly crazy soul drew me in like a bee to flowers. He has that energy and positivity that just washes my burdens away. More than ever, I needed that of him, to escape into his world of irrational shenanigans and forget. When Fenton was around, I could be myself, though school is not the place for frivolity. I barely made it through courses, staring blankly into voids of nothingness as the days passed. Where once a heightened interest in learning stood, now lay crumpled on the floor. As my apathy grew, voices faded, colors turned to shadows, and my void of nothingness became my existence. Pulling away from schoolhouse acquaintances further ensued the sympathies. Not surprisingly, the pain transitioned into numbness and a lax attitude. With Fenton my only source of social interaction outside of home, it was inevitable that I picked up some traits of his. Joking became a coping mechanism to deflect misery. Soon enough I had become the class jester, grades lacking, rule breaking, and generally disinterested in all that once mattered. I'm just saying, if all the races bred together into one being, and all the elemental and celestial powers came together in one being, I'd rather have the racial powers over the celestial powers, stated Fenton, as we chided away during creature studies. Sure, you could control Aqua, Terra, Air, and Ignis, maybe even the sun and moon, but think about the possibilities creature powers have. Fenton scribbled passionately in his schoolwork as he realized how he would formulate his assignment. Godly creatures are older than Magus, created when the gods were allowed dalliances amongst themselves. There are 11 creature races born of the gods. Forest angels, Air and Terra, Siren, Aqua and Air, Mer-children, Aqua and Terra, fairy folk, Air and Ignis, tree nymphs, Terra and Ignis, shapeshifters, Ignis and Aqua, gargoyles, Lunar and Terra, selkies, Solar and Aqua, griffins, Solar and Air, plumes, Lunar and Ignis, reclaimers, Lunar and Solar. The mortal gods and goddesses were able to mate with either gender. However, some matchups are not possible, such as Lunar and Aqua, or Air and Solar with Terra or Ignis. This is because the celestials are made up of those gods. When merged, the elemental gods are no longer present in the cosmos. Fenton continued his scribbling, lost in his own thoughts. I looked down at the course book. Forest angels are wispy visions of beauty, gifted with future insights. They take on different hues when in contact with elements. They are mute, but can communicate their thoughts through physical touch. These are descendants of Solemn, the Terra god, and Priscilla, the air goddess. Angels can inhabit Mortalis or take the mortal form to mate with the Mortalis. Halfling children of angels carry precognitive abilities. I glanced over at Fenton's passage, which carries on and on. My own passage was rather short. Ephemeral beings, more light than solid, gliding auras. I wouldn't be winning any awards, but seeing Fenton's energy pushed me to attempt the assignment as well. I continued reading. Siren descendants of Lacus, the aqua god, and Priscilla, the air goddess, children of the shallow water, dark and compelling to those in range of their call. They live in the shallows of remote islands, preferring to keep their distance from mer-children. Siren may have a daunting appearance, but are eager to aid all travelers in their midst, imparting gifts and quelling loneliness. The siren population is low since the Aqua Wars, and they typically live alone after mating. Halflings born of siren carry the silver tongue ability to influence others with their words. Mer-children, descendants of Lacus, the aqua god, and Solemn, the terra god, children of the deep oceans. These creatures communicate telepathically. They have a wicked temper and malicious nature. Mer-children are highly territorial and live in large communities. Mysterious and cunning, they use their beauty to lure in travelers to their deaths and frame the siren. They can shift into a mortalis, but view them as lesser beings. The Merkeep is said to hold the temple of Lacus. Halflings, born of mer-children, possess telepathy and mind-reading. I suppose you do have a point, I said as I finished reading the passage on merfolk. Future sight, silver tongues, and mind-reading, those are some powerful abilities. Just wait till you get to nymphs, Fenton said, glancing up from his parchment with a huge grin and throwing me a couple of winks. Well now, I have to read the material, and you call yourself a hooligan. Shaping my impressionable mind with education, I answered playfully. Fairy folk, descendants of the air goddess Priscilla and the ignis goddess Ustrina, mischievous creatures that delight in practical jokes. Fairies have an insatiable sweet tooth and can be lured by treats. Fairies are known for bribes of favors, though only the desperate resort to help from a fairy due to negative repercussions. Fairies are masters of emotion and are known to change moods like changes in the wind. Fairies can give up their powers and become forever immortalis. It was discovered that the offspring of fairies who clip their wings have empathic abilities, though it is rare for a fairy to clip its wings. Tree nymphs, descendants of the terra god Solemn and the ignis goddess Ustrina, timid creatures of the land. They are as much trees as they are creatures, phasing back and forth freely. Nymphs are a playful race, sweet and jovial. While they may shy away from other creatures, they are actually very loving and social within their communities. Nymphs are truly passionate and lustful. They commonly mate for one night with humans during the change of the seasons. Halfling nymphs possess the ability to incite love and lust. I see, I mumbled as I finished the passage on nymphs. As fun as those powers might be, I would only want the genuine affection of another, not something akin to a hag's elixirs. Fenton didn't even look up, instead just nodded and continued his own reading. Shapeshifters, descendants of the ignis goddess Ustrina and the aqua god Lacus. They have the ability to change form into any creature they have come in contact with. Little is known about them because they are so elusive, making them among the more feared of the godly creatures. Shapeshifters cannot hold a copied form for longer than 3 days. The true form of a shapeshifter is a mystery. Halflings born of shapeshifters have the ability to change their appearance, but only for an hour, and only to a creature or human shape. Selkies, descendants of the solar god Tinnitus and the aqua god Lacus, a mystical seal creature of land and sea. By day the Selkie has the power to take human form, but will return to seal form from dusk to dawn. Selkies have the power to heal others when in seal form. Seals are considered a symbol of sorrow because Selkies are sometimes seen over a body praying or crying when they are healing. Selkies can heal creatures even on the brink of death. Selkie halflings have minor healing powers, limited by the strength of their training. Plumes, descendants of the lunar goddess Tenebra and the ignis goddess Ustrina. Plumes are vapors from Aether's core that can consume corpses as energy in order to take up human form. Daylight breaks down their bodies so they may only transform at night or in dark places like caves. If threatened, the touch of a gaseous form plume can turn matter to cinders instantly. Halfling plumes have the ability to siphon energy from beings. Gargoyles, descendants of the lunar goddess Tenebra and the terra god Solemn. Gargoyles are creatures of the night, born of stone, often found in graveyards. They are celestial guardians of the lunar goddess. Gargoyles can only come to life at night, unless in the presence of lunar power. Halflings born of gargoyles have the power to turn others to stone. Griffins, descendants of the solar god Tinnitus and the air goddess Priscilla. Griffins are the celestial guardians of Tinnitus. They are winged lions by day, or in the presence of solar power. At night, griffins return to lion form. Halfling griffins have the ability to fly. Reclaimers, descendants of the solar god Tinnitus and the lunar goddess Tenebra. Reclaimers have very powerful anti-power. Within them lies the power of both celestials, which, in turn, equates to all four elements. Reclaimers are essentially humans with the ability to permanently remove a magus's or godly creature's ability. Halflings, born of reclaimers, have the ability to temporarily block powers in the vicinity. I finished up the passages with a piqued interest in godly creatures. It had been a while since any courses had been able to do so. I set down the tome and regarded the creatures one by one. I supposed if I could have powers of any of them, it would be merfolk mind-reading. Knowing one's true self or intentions without the worry of deceit would be a great asset indeed. I certainly see why you prefer godly creature powers to magus, I stated. Some of these creatures and abilities are truly incredible. Have you ever met a godly creature? What would you be given the choice? I asked Fenton. That's enough chatter, Miss Gallens. Your conversation can wait until class has ended, Instructor Modus snapped from his desk. He peered over at me through his heavy spectacles with a look of frustration and disappointment. His copper hair was pulled back in a neat plait. It was clear that the frustration had finally topped the scales of his limits, because he strummed the desk anxiously as he spoke, indicative of a soon-to-be outburst. Nevertheless, I was far too engulfed in my current conversation with Fenton to notice the telltale signs of an impending explosion. I finished the scroll hastily and scribbled my name at the top. It wasn't nearly as extravagant as Fenton's surely was, but it would cover the bases. I got up and crossed the room to Mr. Modus's desk and placed down the parchment, apologizing for my outbursts as he eyed me with contempt. I could hear snickering behind me as I stood waiting for the instructor's approval. As I turned back around, I noticed hurried glances returning to their work and hushed tones swimming around the room. I looked about and noticed Fenton across the room, biting his lip and beckoning me over. As I approached, I could feel what he was about to say as he spoke. The chill breeze through the windows wafted in and pressed against my damp gown, now covered in blood. Hot embarrassment flashed across my face. My heart sped up, and heat radiated through my whole body, shooting down my arms. It was hard to believe what happened next, as flames shot out of my fingers and lit up the classroom. Screams went up all over the place as students ran out of the room and dashed outside to the courtyard. Before I knew it, the other classrooms were emptying, and we were all ushered outside. I stood there in a maddened haze, barely registering the looks of fear and amazement centered on me as word spread of the incident. Smoke choked the air like a scorching scarf around our necks. Even amid all the chaos, I could only think of one thing. Alira had told me the courses would be over by now. How could this be? When the imminent shock dissipated and realization flooded over me, I was overcome with guilt for what had been done, happiness for obtaining Magus powers, and worry for what punishment would befall me. A glint caught my eye again as I stood immobilized in thought. Looking down, I saw that a light in the shape of a sun burned from within the skin on the back of my hand. I thought back to the previous nights when I would catch a glimpse of light on my path and chuckled at myself, realizing that I had been following myself around. The instructors called for men to put out the flames, but by then the classroom had been lost entirely. A charred and murky mess of ash and water was all that remained. Maps, books, and furniture were all gone. The roof and half the outer wall bore the brunt of the structural damage. Luckily, nobody was hurt in the fire, easily able to flee before the fire gorged itself on the premises. The students were dismissed to their homes, while I was left to speak with the headmaster in the courtyard. Whispers passed from one person to another, and even Fenton stood carefully away from me as he waited for his mother to retrieve him. Grandfather was called in, and the three of us stood mute until the headmaster started in. "Sir, it has been witnessed that Paisley is a fire magus, and as you can see is a danger to have here at school," Headmaster Bray started. He spoke with a calm and practiced demeanor, clasping his dark black hands in front of him. A sweat broke out on his brow, betraying his calm, and it occurred to me that he was carefully weighing his words. His pitch-black eyes kept a steady gaze on Grandfather and avoided my direction entirely. Grandfather looked over at me in bewilderment and disappointment. I recalled the conversation I had overheard last night and knew that whatever graces had been gained were washed away in an instant. It was all I could do to keep quiet now, and as I attempted to plead my case, was silenced with a single raise of the hand. "I will certainly pay for the damages, Headmaster. Where can her schooling continue, if not here?" Grandfather asked. "There are a few options available to Paisley. Firstly, she can resume studies from home if you have the proper tools and guidance to train her in schooling and magic craft. Secondly, there is the Magus School on Magus Isle. It would have all the resources she would require. Lastly, there is the tutelage, a renowned private mentorship that focuses more on magic craft, though highly exclusive." "Thank you, Headmaster Bray," Grandfather said as he motioned for me to leave. "I will ensure that compensation for damages is promptly received." We left with a curt nod of dismissal and a downward glance from Mr. Bray. Grandfather and I walked briskly down the courtyard. Grandfather with his unwavering stature, though my own eyes were cast on the ground to avoid seeing the carnage of the fire. Onlookers from town pressed in, gossiping steadily as we passed. Some had already heard the news and pointed emphatically toward us as we strode past. To be a magus on Mortalis Isle was not unheard of, but on the rarer side for sure. Most magus resided on Magus Isle, having remained in the vicinity after attending the Magus School, Theria. While Father had told us stories about many traveling magus, he was the only one I'd ever met. I would often dream of being a magus, though possessing the powers quite different than what I had imagined. We rode home in silence, my thoughts screaming at me every which way they could. I wondered what would be in store for me next. Homeschooling like Alira, no doubt. After hearing Grandfather's tale, I was doubtful I would be learning any magics. Possibly a reform school to whip it out of me. The silence was a wall as thick as iron. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break it, and so we carried on the rest of the way home, locked away behind our iron thoughts.